Okay, our next presentation is going to deal with digital reinvention, how to win big in today's complex digital environment. And to talk about that is going to be the Executive Director of IBM iX, Mr. Jan Pilhar. Give him a warm round of applause.
Hello. Thank you very much for the warm introduction, and thank you very much for your interest in the topic of this session, how to win big in digital. And if we look at it, I mean, we're at one of the premier fairs for digital reinvention, transformation. We have halls full of exciting innovations, of new technologies, of things that help us win big in digital. So what should and could I talk about? And we thought, should I talk about a certain technology, how to implement it, and so on? And we decided to take a step back and look rather at the mindset we feel you should adopt to win big in digital, to drive your organization into a successful digital future, and look at some of the principles you should follow to make it a success, to really propel your business forward in this complex digital era. So let's first take a look at the mindset. And what we see, and it does fill us with great joy, is a re-emergence of optimism. And we're actually coming out of years of fear and despair, because especially larger companies were fearing digital change, because it seemed that there's always some nimble startup, some guys in a garage, and they could build a platform, they could build a product, they could build a service, and they could just take away market share and business from you, even though you were in business for a long time. And especially for larger corporations, it almost seemed like all your experience, maybe you were in business a couple of decades, maybe even a century, and you had a workforce who could do things great, that was all legacy. And legacy didn't sound good. It sounded like something it's more an obstacle, it's a hindrance on your way to changing and to adopting digital as it should be done. And if it's not the nimble startups, the other fear factor were the digital giants. If Amazon or Apple would decide tomorrow to enter into your field, into your industry, they could just take it away from you and there's nothing you could do. And this state of fear and despair has basically been on the forefront of corporate minds for the last couple of years, and now we're seeing optimism and a re-emergence of confidence in legacy, in experience, in industry know-how. But let's take a look at what's happening in the market and in the minds, and why are we saying that there is a newfound optimism. If we look at digital disruption, it's happening in waves. We think back about 20 years, we saw what happened to the music industry. Everybody remembers Napster, what happened to photography when digital cameras came about, and so on. Fast forward 10 years, 2007, suddenly we have the iPhone, the mobile revolution starts, media comes under severe pressure, advertising business is falling apart, how do we basically sell content? Everybody can always access it for free everywhere. The travel industry has dramatically changed. The disintermediation of hotels, of airlines, of everybody serving travelers and passengers through booking platforms, basically the whole business moving there, a large cut of the business being captured by platforms. That has been happening. And now currently we see the banking and the insurance companies transforming. We see huge changes in healthcare. We see the automotive industry, a core industry here in Germany, transforming. Not only autonomous driving, electromobility, but also finding new services. Not just developing cars, but developing mobility services that people will use and buy from them who will not buy a car anymore. So tremendous change. But what is really interesting is that the cycles, these waves of disruption, are shortening. And the first wave was about 12 years, and then was down to 8 years, and now it's down to 5 years, and it's shortening and shortening. And the smart people at Singularity University, they already said a couple of years ago that the average half-life of a business competency, something you as a business can do well, you develop maybe decades in doing it well, that half-life, how much time do you have to milk that economically, to make money with that, dropped from 30 years in the 1980s down to about 5 years a couple of years ago, and it's probably shortening even further. And that corresponds exactly with the cycles we just saw. So obviously, the speed of change is accelerating. And what we're looking at is, with digital technologies, is not a linear change. A linear change is step after step after step. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that is something we as humans are very used to, because we grow older a year every year. Our kids grow an inch taller every year. Our salary might increase a little bit every year. It hardly ever grows exponentially. It's something very linear. Exponential change, on the other hand, that means 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and so on. And in a few steps, I'm in Munich, and a few steps more, I'm somewhere around the world. That is exponential change, and that is exactly where the disruption is happening. If in an industry, your competition is developing and innovating on a linear path, and suddenly someone comes on an exponential path, that's where opportunity is created and disruption happens. Why is it happening? Why is it accelerating so fast? Because we don't have one technology, digital, changing everything. Today, we have a whole plethora of different technologies, and they reinforce each other, and they amplify the impact. We have everything being networked and connected. We have the mobile revolution. We have social media and collaboration tools. We have analytics and cognitive abilities we didn't have a few years ago. We have the Internet of Things, everything being with sensors, sending data, and we do have cloud computing, meaning I can leverage all these technologies without owning large data centers, needing big, deep pockets to do that. And that is enabling, it's the combination of these forces, enabling new business models, smarter products, smarter factories, more integrated value chains, and a lot of the things the talks on this stage today were about. So, obviously, this change, and this accelerating change, in the last 20 years gave rise to a lot of great businesses. Businesses we both admire and we fear, as we said. We have Amazon, we have Apple, we have Google, we have Facebook, we have all these companies who grew, and they grew so quickly that as a more traditional business, you can hardly understand where that growth comes from. And obviously, that was exploited and turned into a story of fear and despair, as we said. Because basically what happened is that the consultancies and the tech companies always instilled fears. Study after study appeared, and it basically all had the same message. It was, you are too slow, the others are faster, no matter how much progress you make, it's never enough. And if we just look at some of the headlines, just from last week or from a few weeks ago, slow pace of digital transformation, costs a fortune, Europe risks falling behind. And you have these studies for Germany, for Italy, for the UK. It's a whole machine pumping out fear of it's not fast enough, it's never enough. Companies are just not getting it, they're falling behind, they're blocking themselves, and on and on and on. And that's exactly where this culture of fear and of it's never enough, and I'm somehow driven by despair, these other guys are faster and nimbler, that's where it came from. But what we need to understand is that currently we are in a new wave of digital disruption. And that is fundamentally different than the first two waves we just looked at, which brought about these great digital companies. If we look at the decade from 1996 to 2006, we had the internet boom. That's where these companies were started, and with the growth of the internet and rapid adoption, they grew. The next decade, we had the smartphone boom. A lot of computing power in every pocket, and suddenly these giants from the decade before could scale their business even larger, and new entrants came about. What was inherent in the quality of these two booms was that the technology to build a business in these booms was very simple. It's basically internet technology. And building a website is not easy, and running a business, scaling a business is not easy. But it's not as complex as the mix of technologies we are looking at these exhibition halls. Because we're now talking about artificial intelligence, about IoT, about robotics, about autonomous driving, about drones, and all these things. And these are technologies that it's really difficult to just build a business thing in a garage, because they take a lot of know-how, and they take a lot of deep expertise and domain knowledge to apply them, let's say, in a factory setting, or let's say in some other situation. It's not something you just start and have a platform and it's a little bit of a website and maybe an app. It's much more complex, and it doesn't work without deep knowledge of an industry. So we have a different quality of the current era of disruption, and that makes this legacy thing, decades of experience in building engines, in creating great machines, in specific chemical products, is suddenly worth something again. It's not just a burden, legacy and all these things, and it's nothing. It's a treasure, because it will help you to really apply AI, IoT, robotics to real business problems. You can only understand and really understand in the depth necessary if you have this industry knowledge. So what we're seeing is, and it started in October last year with a few articles in the tech press, that the startup era seems almost over. And that's a little bit ironical, because we see that a lot of cities are still trying to make all these startup hubs and want to attract startups and their startup awards. And that's all great, because we do need entrepreneurs, we do need new ideas. But these two booms, the internet boom and the smartphone boom, which made it very easy to build a business and scale it up and suddenly be worth $1 billion, that's more or less over. Because if you have such an idea today, then basically some of the big guys will either copy you or they will buy you, and there's no way that you can become that big. And if it's not such an easy idea, something easily copyable, it's exactly what we see. It's AI, IoT, robotics, and a lot of other things, and it requires a lot of knowledge that, as a totally new company, you rarely have. You might have them in a very specific case, but it's nothing you grow to $1 billion with. So that's a very different situation. And what we're now seeing is that the larger companies are suddenly getting it. And if we look at a survey we're running as IBM every year, it's the C-level study. We ask about 5,000 C-level executives across all industries around the world, what is their digital agenda, what is on their mind in terms of digital disruption and how they're moving their business forward. We see that the question of where will the biggest threat to your business come from, where's the biggest competition, is fundamentally changing. If we look at the number from last year's survey, and the numbers are from 2016, we released them in 2017, 53% of C-level executives said, I think the biggest threat is some outsider. I might not even see coming. Somebody coming in, taking my business, eating my lunch, and I don't even know who it is. Will it be a startup? Will it be a digital giant? I'm afraid. And that number is, just 1 year later, is down to 23%, a drop in 30% in where will the biggest threat come from. And that comes along with the realization that legacy businesses, that the know-how is worth something, and it comes with the realization that a lot has already been achieved. I mean, large corporations have built labs, have invested in digital talent, and it's starting to pay off. So if we look a little bit deeper at the numbers, the question was, dear C-level executive, what type of enterprises do you think will lead the disruption in your industry? A whopping 72% said it will be the industry incumbents. The companies already successful in that specific industry, they will drive digital change. They're on the forefront. And it's not the digital giants. Only 34% say those will be the ones who really disrupt my industry. It will not be the companies from other industries who suddenly have all this knowledge and apply it, because it's not happening. That's the 23%. And smaller companies and startups, a mere 22% think they are a big threat. And these numbers are fundamentally different and show that there's a regain in confidence, a re-emergence of optimism in being an industry expert is really important for the next wave and this current wave of digital change and innovation. And the nice thing is, it's not just in the boardroom. It's also young people entering the workforce now. And these are numbers from Manager magazine, a German business publication just from last month, that even the university graduates now believe it's not the startups where the really cool, innovative things are happening. It's the big companies. And that's where they want to go, because they believe the race, the digital race, will be won in the large corporations. So at the top and at the bottom, there's a newfound confidence and optimism in the ability to drive digital change in large corporations and to put all that years of experience and that deep domain knowledge to good use. And we think this is a very good thing, because as Helen Keller, famed American author, said, optimism is actually the faith that leads to achievement. It's not fear, it's not despair that might also drive you, but in not a positive way. And we think it's really good and really helpful to a lot of change initiatives and transformation initiatives that this newfound optimism is in the world and in the minds, both in the boardroom and in the classroom. But obviously, that is not enough. You have to channel that optimism into the things that are really important to drive digital change. And from all the different things you could look at, we think that 3 things stand out as the core principles you need to follow, you should apply. And that is boldness, being daring, being bold. That's a relentless focus on experience for your customers, for your employees, for your partners. And that is really the building and nurturing of a digital culture with specific traits that help you propel your business forward. Let's look at boldness. We really think that you should not just transform. And if you look at these halls, everybody talks about digital transformation. It's an important concept, but we think it's much more important to, where applicable, where possible, to really dare to reinvent. Because if you look at your business and you see how you can approach digital change, there's different levels. And it's almost like in a video game where the lower levels are easier to master and it gets harder the higher you go up the ladder of levels. And the easiest level is digitizing things. That means you might have a paper form and now you have a digital form. And a lot of companies are investing huge amounts of money in that kind of digitization. We see that in healthcare, in e-government, in companies, that basically you just take a process that's already there and you just move it into the digital age by building it digitally. The big problem is, if you had a bad and inefficient process before, you will have a digital process, but it's still bad and inefficient. You just copied it one-to-one. So the next concept is obviously, well, I want to transform it in something new. I want to do digital transformation, which means I'm here and I'm somehow transforming into this new thing from A to B. And that's good, and that usually means you connect databases, you help integrate systems in your company, you try to avoid some of the stupid things pure digitization does by maybe just having a form translated, and the user still needs to type it all in, but you already have it in your database, just hook up that database. That's transformation. And that's good, and that's already hard, but we think the next level is really digital reinvention. That means that you look at what value do you create for your customers? What are you actually doing for them? And radically rethinking this, looking at the different technologies we saw earlier, and how can they help you reinvent your business? Let me give you a simple example. If I have a door and I'm locking it with a lock with a digit lock. Digitization would mean that I might have to go there, and maybe there's an app or a smartphone thing, I type in my code and then the door opens. That's great. I don't have to fiddle around with a lock. I can do it electronically. It's still the same thing. I have my code right here. If I'm now in the digital transformation thing, I might say, well, I could do this smarter. He doesn't have to type in the code. I give him maybe a wearable device, and the code's already in a database, and it's then transmitted, and then I go to the door, and then the door opens. He doesn't have to type it in. He doesn't have to remember the code. That's great. Reinvention would be something that Apple started, or all the Chinese handheld makers making now. Just use your face. Why do you ever have to remember a code, store code in a database? Just use your face to open the door. That's a new way of solving that problem of opening the door, granting access. Is that possible for anything? Is digital reinvention possible all the time? No, because if you use the face, you obviously cannot share a code. If I have a wearable device, I can give it to somebody else and he can go through the door. That might be good because I'm sick today and he has to go to work. If it's my face, he can never enter. So there still might be cases where just transforming is good. But you should always think about reinventing and thinking how you can create that value smarter and use the digital technologies to move it forward. The second imperative, the second principle you should follow is really an obsession, a relentless obsession with customer experience. That means putting what the users want, what your customers want, also what your employees want, what your partners want, at the core of what you're doing, and always start with the end in mind and build your systems from that perspective. Really be customer-centric. Don't start with the machines and the infrastructure, and then you realize there's a user and he doesn't like it. And that comes about because we are now in a situation with something we call the last best experience effect, which means that if I have an experience somewhere in the digital sphere, and it's seamless, and it's well done, and it's smartly created, I immediately expect that from all the other companies. And anybody here involved in digital projects knows that's really hard. A one-click checkout process, as Amazon offers, is really hard to implement with the logistics and the back end and everything you need. But the customer demands it because it's there and you can't do it. How can that be? And all the marketing money you're spending on telling how great and innovative you are and how much of an innovative leader you are as a company is shattered and is wasted if you're not able to deliver. And that means, and we just illustrated this here for a well-known German car maker, one of our clients, could be any company, this is just an example. When it comes to experience, it's not enough to just look at your immediate competitors. Even if we now know those will be the ones driving the future of mobility, the innovative industry incumbents. But it's not enough to just look what they're doing. If I, as BMW, are building a car configurator, and I'm happy because it's a little bit better and a little bit more seamless than the one of Volvo, that's not enough. I have to also look at the digital leaders, those really developing constantly and elevating constantly how they deliver experiences. And I have to look at a Nike, how they help people choose apparel, how they help them create new products. I have to look at an Airbnb. How do they help passengers and travelers to find the right destination? How does Amazon make recommendations? And I have to get inspired by this and translate this into an experience that's up to par with the digital leaders. Otherwise, I cannot sustain the experience level that is expected in today's market. And to do that, we really have to be driven by empathy. And that is something we see more and more being talked about also in tech circles. But in the past, empathy was like, it almost sounds philosophical. Like, what are you talking about? We have tech and infrastructure and data and systems. Why empathy? Because what you should do is not just look at users and customers and segments and abstract categories and look at the data that's produced around these categories. You really have to look at them as humans trying to achieve something, trying to solve a problem, trying to get from A to B in a specific manner. And understanding this helps you create the right products, creating the right experience, and then building some systems to support this experience. The third imperative, the third principle to follow, and that's the hardest one to do, obviously, and it's easy to stand here and proclaim this, is creating and nurturing a digital culture. I'm from IBM iX. We are a digital agency. We were born digital. We started with a digital culture. But we work with a lot of companies who come from an engineering culture, product obsessed, focused on product features, and long cycles of research and development, all these things. But that's really key to move from that culture into a more digitally future-proof culture. And that means what you want to learn from the startups, even if they're not the ones driving the change so much, it's their focus and dedication and their speed. You want to envision and ideate what you want to achieve in digital really quickly. You want to create and test really quickly, like a startup. Speed is of the essence. But once you scale it up, you want to be an enterprise. And you want to have the stability and the professionalism of a large enterprise, because then you have a world-class service and a world-class experience. And for that, you obviously need to break down your silos. And that's easier said than done. That means getting your IT people talking to your business functions. We are in so many projects where we have these silos and they're not talking to each other and they're sending us identical project requests. And we could probably sell the same project 3 times. But you have to tell these guys, sit at a table, get together, discuss what you want to achieve, and break down these silos. And also break down the data silos. Because you sit on so much data usually, and you know so much stuff about your production processes, about your customers, and it's all sitting in these databases, and you're not using it. and you have to connect it, you have to integrate it. Because today, a lot of value is created by having a lot of signals, a lot of data sources, and knowing how to integrate them. We already talked about speed. You have to speed up, you have to become quick, you have to become agile. We currently pride ourselves that we can build a fully functional digital service and launch it into the market in 10 days. That's the speed that is, currently, we think, one of the fastest things. Not 3 months, not 6 months, not 3 years, 10 days. That's not possible with any digital product, but it shows you how fast things can happen today. And that gives you sort of a measurement for where you need to move to. And last but not least, obviously, failure culture. You need to embrace failure, and you have to create a culture, and that's a leadership issue all the way, to help people be able to dare things, not to make stupid mistakes, failures that could have been predicted, but to test, and if it's failing, really quickly learn from it, and repeat and do it better. And that's what is data-driven, that is what is learning-driven, that's what you need to adopt. And we, in most corporations, unfortunately, still have a culture where even if failure needs to be disguised as some success, we've all been there, built that PowerPoint. Actually, it's really cool. Instead of just saying, we failed, but we tried it, we had the boldness, we dared to reinvent it, it did fail, but we learned from it, and now we have a better version, and we're in the market with something that's better than something we had yesterday. So there you have it. How do you win big in digital? We see all these technologies. If chosen wisely, if applied smartly, they will help you to win big. But you should be optimistic, especially as a company with years of experience in something you do well. And you should use that optimism to reinvent yourself, to be bold, to dare to reinvent things. And you should obsess about your experience, the experience you're delivering to your employees, to your customers, to your partners, because that's ultimate what drives the value for them, and that's why they pay you and why you can derive value from that. And last but not least, you need to nurture a digital culture. You have to get in the talent. You have to get faster, get nimbler, break down the silos, and then you will be able to win big in digital. Thank you very much. Maybe there are some questions. There's a question.
Okay, thank you. As you have mentioned, there are 3 stages of the digital transformation, including like the digitalization, digital transformation, and the digital reinvention. But I'm still not very clear what's the difference between the 3 stages. Can you explain more detailed? Thank you.
Yes. As I said, just digitizing means you take something that's already there and you more or less just put it into a digital format. And if the thing you have is not good, it's not going to be good in a digital form. It's still the same thing. If you have a great process, that's okay. Digital transformation means, for us, that basically you start connecting your systems. You start breaking down your silos in terms of data you have, connecting data. We see that a lot in the experience space, single view in the customer, 360 view, knowing what you already know, for example, for your customer. But that's still trying to get from A to B by still being A and trying to become B. And it's still, you're starting from where you are. And it's different if you go over here and really start to think freshly, how could I deliver the value I deliver free of how I'm doing it today? And maybe you realize it's not possible. I have to go back because I cannot completely rethink it. But there's a lot of things, and we are involved in a lot of projects where I can totally rethink and reinvent how I'm delivering value. And if you look in the insurance industry, if you look at the banking industry, a lot of the systems they have are completely obsolete. You can suddenly deliver the same thing, credit, scoring, all these things, which much smarter, newer systems, which don't rely on the massive databases, infrastructure you needed for the old processes. And you probably wouldn't have gotten there by trying to come from there to here. But with a fresh start, and the boldness to do that, you can uncover new opportunities. And that's not always possible for core business processes. That usually comes, if we say new business models, new revenue opportunities. But that's how we would say these are the steps, and they're continuously harder to implement as well. There's a question.
Hi, my name is Mahim Gupta.
Hey.
You mentioned that the industry believes over a year that the risk from outside has depleted from 50 plus to about 23%. Does industry now believe that the competitors have internally evolved and accepted digitization, and that is why the external fear has been reduced to an internal or a similar industry competition?
We attribute that change in sentiment to mainly two factors. One is, as you mentioned, the investments paying off. I mean, larger corporations are doing a lot in transformation and in reinvention and investing a lot in talent, in systems, in setting up labs, setting up garages, setting up hubs, all that stuff. It starts to pay off. That's one thing. We say we're actually moving forward despite media and the consultancies telling us all the time, it's not enough, you're too slow, whatever you're doing, it's not enough. You realize, well, we're actually not as bad as they're telling us all the time. That's one factor. The second factor is exactly realizing that with this new wave of disruption, it will be a lot more B2B focused things. It will be a lot of things more closer to core processes, to production processes, to really the core of building value, and less just things, let's say, on the customer front. That a lot of stuff where the great efficiencies are and where the biggest levers are will be in the core business. And that is not something an outsider can easily replicate. He just doesn't have that knowledge. He just doesn't have that industry experience. And that's what I meant with legacy, almost a dirty word, is not as bad anymore. And I don't mean legacy in terms of systems and old infrastructure, but in terms of a history and a workforce that know how to do something well, and now fusing it with digital gives them a head start. And ironically, if we look at a lot of these pure platform businesses, and it was always, the idea was they're so asset light. You just build a website and have a small back end, and basically you just find buyers and sellers or hoteliers and travelers, and you just match them, and you get a transaction fee. That the large platforms are actually now investing heavily in assets. Uber, for example, just bought 24,000 Volvos. That's not asset light. That means suddenly you have to manage a fleet, and you have to have that knowledge how to manage a fleet, depreciation value, all that things comes into play. That's different. As you know, Amazon is opening stores. A lot of these delivery services are suddenly open their own restaurants and kitchens because there's demand. It's not asset light anymore in a lot of cases, because as a platform, there's a ceiling of growth, and then you have to go into the offline world and suddenly invest in bricks and mortars. And the companies already there realize, hey, wait a minute, these digital guys are branching out, and I'm already there, so maybe I'm not in such a lost position for the future.
Thank you very much, Jan Pilhar. It has been absolutely fascinating following your talk. I've not been sitting here, I've been sitting backstage.
Great.
Executive Director, IBM iX, all the best for your future projects.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.